Actually, I'll start with a story. Journalists at their core are storytellers, so you'll hear a lot of personal anecdotes tonight. But I'll start with a very recent one. So I left Singapore Tuesday morning, flew a total of 20 hours to get here, including a 4-hour transit in Hong Kong. Was very exhausted, arrived in DC Tuesday evening, was just ready to get to bed. So I line up, the immigration line is long, finally make it to the counter. The immigration officer asks me why I'm in the US. And I say, okay, I'm here for a talk. And he says, okay, what do you do? I say, I'm a journalist. And he says, what are you going to talk about? And I say, freedom of press in Asia. And he said, oh, news outlets are just trying to make money. And I said, yes, some more than others. Good thing. There's a lot happening in the world that there's a lot to sell anyway. And he stamps my passport, and I walk away, and he yells behind me, journalists just make stories up. Welcome to America. So I was surprised, and I literally stopped in my tracks and wanted to turn around and just ask him what he meant. But then realized that if I did, I might not be standing here today. So sucked it up and kept walking. I thought it was such an interesting experience. Also really representative of how times are changing. And it was very frustrating. But as you'll hear tonight, it's something that I've gotten unfortunately used to, my colleagues and I. But I think one of the major things I want to do tonight is really to humanize the experience of being a journalist under attack. You hear about it all the time, but I think perhaps to hear it from someone who literally has to, like we say, eat death threats for breakfast, perhaps you'll see it in a new light. Like Lindsay said, I'll be speaking largely about Rappler tonight. While I have since moved as editor-in-chief of Vice based out of Singapore, I am part of the founding team of Rappler, still very much connected to them in terms of contributing and still very much in close touch with the team. And I do think that our story is very representative of what's happening in Asia, and it's a good case study to start with. So I'll start with another story. This was the top story a week after my 25th birthday in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. The Inquirer is the top newspaper in the Philippines, and it basically talks about the largest corruption scam in modern history. So this was in 2013. NBI probes 10 billion peso scam. 10 billion pesos is about 200 million US dollars. I'll read you parts of it. It says, the National Bureau of Investigation, our version of the FBI, is looking into allegations that the government has been defrauded of some 10 billion pesos over the past 10 years by a syndicate using funds from the pork barrel of lawmakers and various government agencies for scores of ghost projects. Described by an NBI investigator as the mother of all scams, the con game came to light in March. All 6 whistleblowers were interviewed by the Inquirer, which also secured copies of their sworn statements. The extent of the swindling brought tears to one NBI agent in an interview. So this came out, and no one really knew what to do with it. This woman, her name is Janet Napoles, had basically been colluding with lawmakers for a decade. And what she had said is she'd come over to a lawmaker and say, hey, I have a bunch of fake NGOs. Let's use your money for a ghost project. I'll get half of the kickback, and you get the rest. Very appealing, right? And Janet said, I will take care of all audits, all paperwork, all ghost projects, all proof of the project. All you got to do is make sure that my NGO gets that grant, okay? And this went on for 10 years. When the NBI started to investigate her, of course, she knew so many people in government. She was alerted pretty early on. And the stories afterwards were really shocking. Basically, they spent the night paper shredding all documents, all paper trails, that by the time this story came out, there were no documents left. At this time, I had just turned 25. I was assigned to cover Malacanang, which is our version of the White House. And the story was given to me. Investigate this. And I didn't know where to start. So I kept looking and found this. The younger daughter, her name's Jean, had deleted her Twitter, her Facebook, her Instagram, but forgot to delete a 3-year-old MySpace blog. And on that blog was basically a whole just evidence of how they live their lives. And it was just a bunch of designer shoes and jets and just everything. And then, okay, so I wrote that story. Gina Paulus, 23, the younger daughter of Janet Lim Paulus, deactivated her social media account shortly after her mother was named the person behind an alleged multi-billion peso pork barrel scam, but she neglected to remove an old personal blog from 2011. It has pictures of her trips to Paris and Tokyo, as well as her posing with Hollywood celebrities, including Justin Timberlake, Blake Lively, and Justin Bieber. Jean's blog shows her inclination for designer shoes, bags, and clothes from brands like Louis Vuitton, YSL, Chanel. Comments on the internet decried the young Napolos's lifestyle and accused her of using pork barrel money obtained by her mother to sustain it. And then, jackpot, photos. In limousines, in designer clothes, and for an investigative reporter, this was just what we needed. So I published this story about 2 weeks after the first Inquirer story came out, and you would just be surprised at all the leads I started receiving in my email. Tips just started coming in. I wrote the second story 4 days later. Apparently she owns apartments in LA. Napol's daughter owns 80 million peso LA property. That's about $1.5 million. As a college student, no one can afford that unless you were funded by your mother or government money. And so, you know, we posted photos of what it looked like. And this was a tip that I got an email, just saying, hey, you should look at maybe this property and this name, and it all checked out. She was in her early 20s when she bought a luxurious Los Angeles apartment in a building where Hollywood celebrities and public figures live. And the apartment today is pegged at $80 million, or almost $2 million. It's 1,610 square feet and has 2 bedrooms and 2 baths. Shortly after the story came out, that unit was mysteriously sold. But basically by that time, we had that evidence. And so, you know, the Bureau of Internal Tax Revenue called me, asked for the documents, we gave it, and then the cases started rolling in. And people were pissed. People were angry. Even if the story had been out for several weeks, it was these stories that I think for them it really resonated with the people. You know, Filipinos, being very witty, started posting the photos, and, you know, this is where your taxes go on the shopping bag. Really depressing. This one here in Filipino says, if you only knew how much tax I paid per month, I should have just used that to buy my child milk. Another one, Mr. President, Department of Justice, NBI, please take action, justice for the Filipino people. Many Filipinos are starving, many children cannot afford to go to schools they deserve, and many families do not have comfortable beds to sleep on and house to live in. That's enough. You could really feel the anger, okay? And this was, just to point out also, in the Philippines, yearly minimum wage would be $2,000 US. A pair of Jimmy Choos can go up to $2,400. So you can just feel the anger, and people really spoke up. And it led to the MillionPeople March, which is considered the largest or first rally organized in social media. People were angry, they wanted reforms, and the government listened. So the president did reform the pork barrel system. But this is my favorite result of all of it. The 3 senators were charged. 2 went to jail. The other one, who is 95 years old and still in politics, since he's been there since 1966, didn't have to serve time. Completely different story. However, this to me was why I did what I did. Or this is what the point of being a journalist was, right? And of course, Janet Napolus also went to jail. But it didn't come without consequences. A couple of weeks after I published the first articles, I got this. It was a subpoena for libel. So in the Philippines, libel is a criminal offense. Journalists can go to jail for up to 12 years for libel. And it was from Janet Napolus. And she accused me at that time of making things up. And at this point, when I had gotten this subpoena, she had not been in jail yet. Okay, so I was terrified. I was 25. I did not have money for a lawyer, and I started to question myself. I started to say, okay, what if all these leads that were sent to me were meant to take me down? Or what if these, you know, these photos, like I've been so unfair to this young girl who probably didn't know what was going on. And I started to question myself, which is exactly what they wanted me to do. And I was intimidated, and I didn't really know what to do, but I was very lucky that Rappler at that time had said, don't even worry, we'll pay for all your bills. But can you imagine a journalist, a local journalist perhaps, who didn't have that support from their news outlet? What would they do? And so it was all over the news. They had been asking for 10 million pesos in damages. That's about, I am not good at math, so my notes are here. I want to say $192 million. $192,000. Money I didn't have. This headline was not really something, I think a lot of people who probably know the Nepal's case don't know that this happened. Because reporters in the Philippines get sued all the time, and it just sort of stays there. And this was our response to that case, and I think it really encapsulates the problem. A libel case is perhaps the most common, if not easiest, form of intimidation against journalists because in the Philippines, it's a criminal offense. It will require journalists to post bail, appear in a police station, hire the services of a lawyer, and appear before court whenever there is a scheduled hearing. All these require financial resources and take away precious time that would have otherwise been spent pursuing stories. Absolutely correct. That libel here is a criminal offense, meaning it can merit imprisonment and heavy penalties, is already evidently threatening. It's clearly intended to stop journalists like us from continuing with our reports and dropping our investigations. And that's exactly it. So until today, libel is still a criminal offense in the Philippines, and it's essentially the exact same law that allowed this to happen. Oh, let's go back. Maria Ressa, some of you might have known already, because this was all over the news. On February 14, NBI agents dressed in civilian clothing came to the Rappler office and literally stood outside the meeting room where Maria was. It was 5 p.m. on a Friday. To those who live in the Philippines or who have spent time in the Philippines, Fridays are when journalists are usually arrested because they cannot post bail and they would have to spend the weekend. Sorry, I think this was a Wednesday, but it was at 5 p.m. So Maria knew that there was a cyber libel case, was not aware that a warrant of arrest had been released. And so she was surprised, called her lawyers, but came with them to the NBI office, tried to post bail, was not accepted, so she had to spend the night in detention. Maria Ressa was one of the Time Persons of the Year last year. She is the CEO of Rappler and has been my mentor for much of my career. Another quick story. I had come here, I was born and raised in Manila. I had come here for college, and after I graduated, didn't know what to do. So I had been following Maria on Twitter, and I messaged her, and I said, hi, I know we don't really know each other, but I just wanted advice. Do you think I should come home to the Philippines for journalism? And her response was, let's get on a Skype call. So I was super excited. This is someone I had looked up to. She had been CNN bureau chief in Southeast Asia for 20 years. Very well-respected journalist, and she says, come home and help me start Rappler. And I was like, Rappler's not even a word. You know, for traditional Filipino families, it's like once you make it out, you don't come home, you know? It's like a dream. So what I did was I didn't tell my parents, I packed my bags, and I came home. And my mom was livid. She's like, what are you doing here? But also, hello. And we started Rappler, and that was 8 years ago. And I should probably backtrack and tell you more about Rappler. This is a video that explains much of what we do. We don't have to watch the whole thing, but I'll show you a bit of it.
Even if the military pounds buildings with airstrikes, the enemies can move around from one building to another through these.
Sir, just a follow-up on your citizenship. We understand that you are not a U.S. citizen now, but at any point...
No, I am not. I am a Filipino. I have always been a Filipino. And I have never been a U.S. citizen. I continue to be a Filipino, so that's the end of the story.
Foreign Secretary Perfecto Yasay lies to the CA about his American citizenship.
This is the small road leading to Chameleon, which is a center for sexually abused girls.
Sinabihan kami ng uncle na pumasok ako sa bahay.
Kalida also defends Duterte's decision to allow the burial of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos at the Hero Cemetery.
Okay, so just from that quick 4 stand-ups, we cover everything from, you know, corruption to war. My story, that particular story, was about incest rape in the Philippines. So very critical issues that a lot of outlets don't touch. Oops. So This is a slide from 2012. I realize it's really ugly, but I really like it because it was one of the first Rappler slides that we used to explain what Rappler was. So the word Rappler comes from rap, to talk, plus ripple, which is to make waves. And our idea was to be able to create conversations that would affect conversation and instigate change. And this was Maria's idea. Maria was like, okay, I'm a professional journalist. I've been in this industry for so long, but I also realized that the news is changing. So let's mix that with technology. I will hire a bunch of digital natives, me, and a lot of younger people who didn't necessarily have any experience in journalism, but knew technology, work together. And then she also realized that at that time, it was no longer a one-way conversation with journalists telling people what to think. It had become, because of social media, a two-way conversation, and she decided to embrace that rather than push that away. And that's what her idea was behind Rappler. And it became the first true social news network in Asia. Within 4 years, we became the top online news website that was only purely digital. The only ones above us was the Philippine Daily Inquirer that's had a newspaper for decades, as well as a news TV channel that had an online presence. But we grew very, very quickly. So this was me back in 2011, and we revolutionized how to deliver news. We went straight to YouTube rather than working with, three-man crews that the news outlets were using. They had an audio man, a reporter, and a cameraman. And for us, we would go out on the field literally with just an iPhone that was on steroids, as you can tell, with casing and lights and speakers. And we went out alone on the field, and we were breaking stories and beating TV stations because we were posting our videos directly online. This was before the time of Facebook live streams and all of that, so it was very revolutionary back then. And the best part was we were the only independent news outlet, and still are, in the Philippines. So in the Philippines, a lot of news outlets are owned by businessmen and conglomerates, and Rappler is largely owned by Maria and journalists. And so we did have a lot of independence that not a lot of news outlets can enjoy in the Philippines or even here. We grew from 12 people, I was part of that team, to 100. And we started winning awards. We started getting people's attention. But things started to change very drastically after President Duterte got elected. In 2015, we started noticing weird trends on social media. So this was during the campaign, 2015. President Duterte was elected in 2016. We started seeing unusual behavior in terms of conversations happening on social. So this whole spike here was conversations supporting President Duterte. Obviously unusual unless you had literally more people than the population of the Philippines. So we knew this was bots. So that's when it started. We knew something was wrong, and we started looking deeper. And we found that there were a bunch of fake accounts manufacturing reality on social media. Sounds familiar, I know. This happened actually a year before your elections, your last elections. And we thought it would stop after the campaign. But when President Duterte came to power, it actually intensified. And Maria at that time had thought this was very unusual, so what she did was she actually took the data and she went to Facebook. And she said, you guys need to look at this ahead of your elections. You need to look at this because something fishy is going on. And Facebook ignored her. And your US elections happened, it was the exact same thing that we saw in the Philippines. A lot of people don't know this, but it was ground zero for what happened in the subsequent elections. And after the US elections, 4 months later, Mark Zuckerberg asked for the data. But we saw it first. And a lot of what has happened in the Philippines, we've seen in the rest of the world. So that was the first thing that we started reporting on, that the administration was not happy about. And while we are unable to track exactly who is funding this operation, we have seen a lot of links between accounts from Russia that were also active in the Catalan propaganda movement. We've also been seeing how a lot of those who were instigating this hate speech against media during the campaign were given government positions after President Duterte got in power. So this was the first big report, I think, that had really affected administration and started targeting us. And the second, of course, is Duterte's drug war. I don't need to talk about this. This is all that we see in the news. At this juncture, at this point, there are, I think, about over 20,000 is the estimate now. We don't have a way to really estimate the actual number, but the president had promised to kill drug users or addicts or traffickers, and that's exactly what's happening. So we've been very critical about this, and that's what has led to this. So at this point, there are now 10 cases versus Maria and Rappler, obviously with the goal of shutting us down. Mostly trumped up charges. There are 6 tax evasion cases, accusations of foreign ownership, and of course, cyber libel, which was actually filed by a private individual that the Department of Justice had dismissed, and then a week later actually said they changed their mind. And that's what the warrant of arrest against Maria was on. But at this point, we have paid millions of pesos in legal fees, money we did not account for in the beginning of the year. And that's exactly what they want, is to distract us, and if not to distract us, to suck up funds and basically to shut down. And our license was revoked for foreign ownership, but right now it's still, we're still arguing our case, so there's no final decision. But once a decision is made final, we'll effectively be shut down. And most people who know the Philippines or press in Asia will probably say that's not that surprising. The Philippines is actually one of the most dangerous countries for journalists. Between 1990 and 2017, the Philippines was only second to Iraq in number of deaths of journalists. But while this is a reality, for us who are practicing on the ground, we knew that those that were under threat the most were those in local provinces, journalists in local provinces. Not to say that it's not important, but it's always been that way in a sense that private militaries of politicians in the Philippines would literally just murder local journalists who were writing anything negative about local politicians. It's been a long problem that we've been trying to solve, but I think that with the precedent coming in, this is a quote directly from President Duterte, just because you're a journalist, you are not exempted from assassination if you're a son of a bitch. Freedom of expression cannot help you if you have done something wrong. Immediately, you feel that rhetoric, I mean, as a journalist, that changes. Something is different. Something is inherently different. I also, at this point, just want to bring this up because this did not get enough media coverage, but the story behind it is absolutely shocking. The Maguindanao massacre in 2009, there have not been any convictions yet. It's been 10 years, but I need to just talk about this when I can because the story is just terrifying. And basically what it was a local politician had been ruling a particular province for so long. Someone finally said, I'm going to run against you, had held a press conference. 57 people were on their way to the press conference, including his wife and his sister and 32 journalists. And they were stopped on their way to the press conference in vans by a private military. And were all asked to leave the car and were shot at point blank. All 57, and that included 32 journalists. And when the investigators came, by the time, because they never made it to the press conference and the candidate realized there was something wrong, followed their tracks and found that there were tractors, huge hose that had been there that had started digging to hide the bodies. But that's how intense impunity is in the Philippines. How could anyone think you could get away with that? And sadly, 10 years later, there's still no conviction, and the witnesses have all been dying one by one. But that's the situation in the Philippines, and I think a lot of people don't really know that about the Philippines, and it's only been brought to the surface because of Maria's arrest, when in actuality, our colleagues have been killed for so long. So the Philippines, the situation there is very dire. So when people say, you know, you would expect this from, let's say, Vietnam or Laos, but not the Philippines, I'd like to argue about that. This is a reality that a lot of people don't know about. And this video I'll show you is what has happened since the license or Rappler license was revoked. This was made before Maria's arrest, so it ends in a very happy note, but clearly the mood is a little different now.
If I can make it there, I'll make it. Anywhere, it's up to you. New York, New York.
The Securities and Exchange Commission has ordered the closure.
The Securities and Exchange Commission orders the revocation of
ang Certificate of Incorporation ng online news site na Rappler.
We felt that going to get PDRs, which don't give any ownership or any control, would give us the ultimate independence.
Rappler, try to pierce the identity and you will end up American ownership. CIA funded, gano'n na mga NED, Rappler, yung mga gano'n.
In 2016, Rodrigo Duterte was elected, promising to wipe out drug-related crime. It will be bloody, he warned. The funeral parlors will be packed. He has kept his promise. Thousands have been killed, many among them the poorest in society.
Rappler, your articles are ripe with innuendos and pregnant with falsity. We do not intervene in the affairs of the armed forces. Since you are a fake news outlet, then I am not surprised that your articles are also fake.
Maria and her team are a shining example of principled resistance to the erosion of democratic norms. They have also shown how a newsroom led and staffed by women can stand up to a misogynist president.
Rappler received the Free Media Pioneer recognition for its innovative approach to journalism and audience engagement, and its determination to hold authorities accountable from the International Press Institute in partnership with International Media Support. The National Democratic Institute also gave Rappler the W. Averill Harriman Democracy Award for its work in fighting disinformation and fake news. Rappler's Marawi in 360 virtual reality documentary won top prize for best use of online video at the 2018 Asian Digital Media Awards by One IFRA and Google, and the first prize in the Innovation and Bleeding Edge category of the 2018 Boomerang Awards by the Internet and Mobile Marketing Association of the Philippines, or IMAP. For continuing to shed light on issues that matter, Rappler was also awarded the Data Journalism Website of the Year at the Data Journalism Awards by the Global Editors Network for its #SaferRoadsPH campaign that tackled road safety issues in the Philippines and put together visualized information on road crash incidents and how it can be prevented. Meanwhile, Natashya Gutierrez received an honorable mention from the Society of Publishers in Asia, or SOPA 2018 Awards, for editorial excellence for her story on the rape within the family, the Philippines' silent incest problem. Rappler CEO and executive editor Maria Ressa also bagged prestigious awards. The Golden Pen Freedom Award from the World Association of Newspapers and Publishers, or One IFRA.
It comes at a crucial time when our organization and Philippine democracy are struggling to survive.
The Journalist of Courage and Impact Award from the East-West Center, the 2018 Knight International Journalism Award from the International Center for Journalists.
You don't really know who you are until you're forced to fight to defend it.
The AsiaX International Press Freedom Award from the University of Malaga, and the Gwen Ifill Press Freedom Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ.
Then every battle you win or lose, every compromise you choose to make or to walk away from, all these struggles define the values you live by and ultimately who you are.
Ressa is also one of 4 Time Persons of the Year for 2018, the Guardians of the Year. As of December 2018, Ressa faces 5 tax evasion cases, apart from complaints filed before the Department of Justice, one for alleged violation of the anti-dummy law and another for cyber libel.
Going to hold my government accountable, this is the time to fight. This is the time to tell people, here's the line. And you have to make sure that our government doesn't cross it, because when it does, we're no longer a democracy. We at Rappler decided that when we look back at this moment a decade from now, we will have done everything we could. We did not duck. We did not hide. We are Rappler, and we will hold the line.
So I think it's important to talk about Rappler because it is really a case study of what's happening in the region. Asia, this is a map from Reporters Without Borders. I spent time in Jakarta, like Lindsay said, now work in Singapore, worked in the Philippines, so I am very familiar with Southeast Asia mostly. And if you look at this map, Southeast Asia is all red. Red is bad, black is obviously worst. But you have Vietnam, Laos, China, all expected. But you still do have over Asia some orange spots, which is okay. Yellow is good, and white, which is not here, more on the side, is best. It's mostly actually in Europe, in Scandinavia. So, you have, this is testing my geography a little bit, you have Japan, which is also pretty, Japan, which is good. You have South Korea, which is quite good, and then you go to North Korea, which is not good at all, right? But North Korea, China, Vietnam, Laos, quite expected. Not that Southeast Asia has ever been a shining light for press freedom, but if you look at it, I think in this way, then you can really tell that this region in itself has the most stifled press. With 34 countries and more than half the world's population, the Asia-Pacific region holds all the records with the world's biggest prisons for journalists and bloggers, especially China and Vietnam, and the world's deadliest countries for journalists and bloggers, above all Pakistan, Philippines, and Bangladesh. And of course, there's also the countries who run some of the worst dictatorships and information black holes, such as North Korea and Laos. So let's do a quick tour around Southeast Asia, and you're going to start seeing trends. In Indonesia, this is a photo of students protesting against a new law where Indonesians could be jailed for criticizing national politicians. Critics have slammed the law as a major step back for the world's third biggest democracy. This was 2018. Thailand, I love this photo. This is General Prayut, the Prime Minister, who basically in a press conference brought out a cutout of himself and said, you can ask him your questions, and walked away. Where does that happen? In Thailand, apparently. So the Thai press has been subjected to menacing intimidation as the junta embarked on its roadmap to bring peace and stability. And of course, there's a new law, protection of media rights and freedom, ethics, and professional standards, which basically means the government decides what is published. In Cambodia, the newspaper also in 2018, as you notice, a lot of them has happened in the last year. The newspaper hailed as Cambodia's last independent English daily, the Phnom Penh Post, was sold to a Malaysian investor with apparent business links to Premier Hun Sen. A year before, the Cambodia Daily was given a tax evasion case. Again, sounds familiar, $6 million. Trumped up charges as well, or disputed charges. And in Myanmar, everybody knows about the 2 Reuters journalists who were reporting about the Rohingyas still in jail. Malaysia, this is an actual ad that was everywhere in 2018 as well. Before Najib Razak was defeated, the government passed a controversial anti-fake news legislation, which many saw as an attempt to silence critical voices regarding the 1MDB scandal. Dire situation when you look at it that way. But then also easy to see trends and the similarities. The reason why what happened to Rappler and what happened in Cambodia and what happened in Indonesia matters is because all these countries are looking at each other and seeing what the leaders can get away with. So the tools of one state's repression influences what neighbors do as well. All 10 Southeast Asian states were in the bottom third of the World Press Freedom Index last year. Most of them dropped in rankings. And as we've seen in Rappler and Cambodia, targeted financial inquiries, forcing outlets to close or compromise independence. There are also vague laws. All of a sudden, there's anti-fake news law, anti-libel laws, or can't spread fake news. But these are also nebulous, that it's been very, very hard to navigate. And of course, the rising power of China. Press freedom is deteriorating while Chinese influence is growing. It's unmistakable. This is something that's actually not discussed a lot in Southeast Asian circles. They don't acknowledge it. But basically, as Chinese economy outpaces the US, the West is losing power. They've noticed that under the Trump presidency, no one is holding them accountable for human rights violations. There are no consequences. When President Trump came to ASEAN the last time, he didn't mention anything about human rights. Buddy-buddy with everybody, including Duterte, even with the drug war at its peak. And that's when Southeast Asian nations or Asian nations realize can get away with this, unlike in previous administrations where there were consequences for human rights violations. And there was actually a last thing here, which was social media. Social media has been used to weaponize journalists. While it was our best friend at Rappler when we first started, as it helped fuel our growth, it has been a huge enemy of journalists now, and it's no longer just the government stifling the press, but the public as well. This is one of, the slide shows you the type of abuse that Rappler gets in a daily. Just bomb the Rappler office so the problem is solved. Should we attack the Rappler office now? The people should attack, then drag that whore out of their office since they are destroying the Philippines. That, of course, refers to Maria. But on a more personal level, because I do want to give it a face, and I'm standing here in front of you, women get a brunt of the attacks. Nearly 1/3 of female journalists consider leaving their profession. 70% of women experience more than one type of harassment. These are the type that I've been getting. So I've also written critical articles about the president. They call us prostitutes, obviously a mix of prostitute and the press. My father's name is Francis Gutierrez, and there just so happens to be a crony of the former president whose name is Francis Gutierrez, and they just assumed that he was my father, and spread a news story that the reason I was that I was critical against Duterte, because I'm not anti-Duterte, Rappler is not, it's just critical, and that's always conflated with being anti, is that I was the daughter of someone benefiting from government taxpayers' money. Eventually taken down, but lies always spread faster than truth. This is the former president. They cut off the round table of journalists who were at the Malacanang press corps dinner, same way a White House media dinner, I guess, here, and accused me of having an affair with the former president. Quite a convincing photo, I guess, when you cut everybody out. I had written an article about how there were links to accounts that were attacking the press to Julian Assange. Julian Assange replied to my story and called it the stupidest article ever. Why he's even looking at Rappler if he wasn't at all involved and is sitting in an Ecuadorian embassy, who knows? But it was then used, literally the stupidest article was his actual quote. And it was just used as a meme, being like, stop reporting. Why don't you just model, because you obviously don't know anything. Again, still very sexist. And yeah, shut the fuck up, idiot. Are you really an analyst or, and I want to read this out because it's hard to read, but I think it's important. Are you really an analyst, or are you just a whore that likes it in the ass? Maybe you're just an analyst. Oh well, you deserve those. Or you're a paid hack. So these are the type of things we get every time we publish an article, to the point that I've since actually turned off the comments on my Facebook, which has made me sad too, because then that just takes away all sort of any conversation that you can have with your readers. So solutions, what can we do from here? So this slide is actually a little distorted, but let me try to remember the other two. React and resist. I think that perhaps for someone sitting in New York who doesn't realize how harsh it is or how bad it is in the Philippines or in Asia, what could you do? I like this quote. If the wider world's response turns out to be limp, maybe other regions will think they too can crack down on journalists. When a government goes after a news organization and gets away with it, it sends a signal across the board. I know it's happening in the US as well, how media is being called fake news. I experienced it with an immigration officer, technically a government official. But in Asia, the effects are much more severe. We don't have strong institutions like you do here. It's important to speak up and care about what's happening in the rest of the world. Also because the leadership in the US does affect what happens in Asia. So the second thing I put here was vote wisely. When you see people like Trump throw out those principles in his public statements, describing press as the enemy of the people, it absolutely gives permission, basically, to do just that. And then I know that I also mentioned in this slide to support press freedom initiatives, whether it's, you know, when you read The Guardian, you see those little petitions at the end. If you believe in a news organization, support it. There's crowdfunding initiatives all the time. Rappler crowdfunds for legal fees. There are ways to help. And then the one other thing that I had added on the slide was to influence your circles. Sometimes it's really hard to engage with people with different viewpoints, but I do think it is important. Because, for instance, I would hope that you guys would walk away from here sort of having a better understanding of how bad and how harsh it is, while you had a general idea, kind of really seeing the severity of it, and being able to talk about that with people in your circles. And so I want to end with this, because if there are any journalists in the room, like fear, courage could be contagious. And unlike fear that disempowers, courage built on the power of truth and the unity of all in media is a force that empowers. So I'll end there and answer whatever questions you guys might have. Thank you.